which gospel, Matthew or Luke, has Mark used? It is just at this point that once again the intense verbal differences must be measured. If we do so, we find that it is between Luke and Mark that the greatest amount of verbal disparity exists. Indeed, this word divergence is phenomenal. Mark and Luke give story after story in the same order as a rule, yet they cannot manage to agree on more than 50% of the actual words in a story. One is using the text of the other, yet he is deliberately refusing to copy it word by word. This verbal divergence is so great that it is even amusing. If Mark uses ek out of, Luke will use apo from. If Luke uses ek, Mark will use apo. If Mark uses how, Luke will often use what. If Luke uses how, Mark will use what. If Luke gives teaches, Mark will use a synonym, yet Mark uses teaches opposite Luke's synonym. There are dozens of examples of this kind of synonymic exchange. Obviously, the only explanation of this phenomenon is that one writer is changing the text of the other. The modern habit of tracing synoptic divergences to theological reasons is an almost hopelessly misleading philological method as applied by many New Testament students today. It is Mark who fills the bill as the author who deliberately changes the work of another. It is Mark who is constantly editing, homilizing, stereotyping, and generally rewriting. Luke is decidedly not this kind of writer, as of course neither is Matthew. Quite simply, then, it is Mark who stands chronologically between Luke and Matthew. He is the author who is making constant, radical, and deliberate changes of the Lucan text. Matthew, though not completely dependent upon Mark, is much influenced by him. For this reason, where Mark is present, Matthew and Luke can never give many words in common. On the other hand, Matthew and Luke, when not in Markan context, often agree at length on exact wordings. K.L. Schmidt and Form Criticism, it was then the failure to settle the problem of verbal divergence before accepting a final solution of the synoptic problem which set all of modern research on the wrong trail. The next wrong turning of great moment came in its wake. In 1919, a German scholar, K.L. Schmidt, published his findings on the Raymer framework of the Synoptic Gospels, and the world of New Testament scholarship has never been the same since Schmidt. In a book of over 300 pages entitled Der Rahmen der Geschichte Jesu, explored the geographical and chronological notations of the common synoptic pericope and noted their wide divergence. He labeled these and other words of introduction and ending to the pericope, the framework of the Gospels. His book followed years of intensive study and proved beyond doubt that the disparity was radical. His next step, however, was disastrous. Schmidt concluded from the discrepancies in the framework that our writers actually knew nothing about the placing and timing of events in Jesus' life. On the whole, therefore, said Schmidt, there is no such thing as the life of Jesus in the sense of an unfolding life story. There is no chronological outline of the story of Jesus. There are only individual stories, pericope, which have been inserted into a framework 257. How did he arrive at such a conclusion? The reasoning is not hard to follow and sounds impressive. Schmidt noted the usual fact that the Synoptic Gospels show many parallel stories, usually in 61 contexts. These pericope show the same order. Such a factor can be explained as due to Mark's prior ordering of the stories. Schmidt thought sometimes, however, in 17 instances, the order differs. This difference of order can be said to have been caused by the independent decisions of Matthew and Luke to break occasionally from Markan order. But this must then mean that each writer felt free to shift the position of a pericope more or less at will. Probably, therefore, the evangelists did not really know where each pericope belonged historically. If all this is true, we can think of each pericope as a fixed independent unit, a kind of page to be used in a loose leaf notebook. Somehow these units had developed, probably by a long process of oral telling and retelling. Perhaps they were written down now and then as separate little narrative sheets. In any case, by the time our gospel writers used them, they had become the fixed tradition which the Greek church knew by heart. Now, said Schmidt, how do you make a book out of a series of anecdotes? You lay them out in front of you on separate sheets or do the same in your memory. Decide which ones come first, second, etc., and then proceed to add connecting links which mention place or time according to your own ideas of the general story you wish to tell. On the basis of this hypothesis, Schmidt then said to himself, if I investigate these connecting notes and they turn out to differ radically in the gospel parallels, that will no doubt prove that the loose leaf theory is correct. Important contribution Schmidt is considered to have made was indeed the investigation of the supposed geographical and chronological added notes. He easily showed that the parallel versions of these connecting links differ greatly. By doing so with the usual thoroughness of German scholarship, Schmidt is almost universally supposed to have proven the entire rationality of the form criticism position, but such is not the case. Schmidt's error lay in treating his framework as separate from his units of tradition in concentrating on the framework disparity. He failed to take account of the much larger problem of total disparity. It does not matter where you start comparing the common pericope of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Each verse, each phrase, each word must be studied. And the same radical verbal divergence is soon seen to be as ubiquitous as cats in Jerusalem. There is no justification at all in pleading that framework disparity is some special kind of disparity. If this is true, Schmidt's careful analysis cannot be used to prop up the theory that our gospel materials developed as oral units before being written down. We must say a loud, clear no to the hypotheses of form criticism. They remain unproven and cannot be proven until the prior problems connected with the verbal dissonance of our Gospels are solved. The problems of pericope and verbal disparity largely revolve around the presence of Mark. Take Mark out. And Matthew and Luke show unity of approach. Put Mark in. And the whole picture changes. The clue to the synoptic problem lies in Mark's redactic activity as the middleman. Between Matthew and Luke, we can add that with Schmidt, we must recognize the possibility that units can be shifted from location to location. The anthology was not itself a narrative, chronological document, but presented only parts of earlier, more complete stories. Mark and Prioress were on the right track when they saw some of the difference Mark was making in pericope order. They jumped the track when they did not go on to study the pattern of difference Mark was making in verbal order and identity.